Hey, so I don't have a plan for this video, but I was watching Why Do You Postpone Yourself? It's a video the channel Accepting the Universe uploaded, and it was very profound and very eye-opening, and it made me think of its application to my life and my college decisions, and I feel like I wanted to share that a little bit because I don't want people to make similar mistakes to what I did, you know? Because I'm trying to get out of it right now. I'm trying to get out of the mistake I did. And hopefully I will, but I just wanted to illustrate that because I know, especially in America and in other Western countries where university is something you pay for and something you really have to financially invest in, that it's very necessary for people to know this so that they don't replicate a similar error. For starters, I don't believe you should go to college if you're gonna go into debt over it, honestly. I really don't think you should. Unless there's like a scholarship opportunity or some kind of opportunity for you to study without needing that, or if there's like community college or something like that, because you shouldn't be indebted to something you decided when you were like 17 or 16 or whatever. You shouldn't be indebted to that, no matter what it is, right? Second point, when it comes to making your university decisions, you really need to know yourself. You genuinely need to sit with yourself. And the transition from high school to college is extremely challenging, unbelievably challenging. It's a transition between a sheltered upbringing to the real world, which is so completely different than what you experience in high school, especially if you kind of grew up in a more sheltered environment and where you really didn't have that much interaction with the real world and what it had in store. And so if you are going to college and you decide that you're fine with taking loans and things like that, I want you to take a gap term. I really believe you should take a gap term. I didn't believe in them before, but I genuinely believe in a gap term, especially if it's a gap term that is beneficial to you in the sense that it isn't just you sitting in your room, because that would just prolong the experience of being sheltered. But if it is a gap term if you can take a gap term and keep, like, I don't know, interacting somehow with the university you're going to or other universities, or interacting if you have like an older sibling that goes to uni, and if you can like accompany them around classes, things like that. That is exactly the kind of things I want you to do in your gap term, okay? I want you to go to university level classes of the majors that you're thinking of. I want you to talk to people. Talk to people in the major that you're thinking of. If you're thinking of more than one, talk to them. Talk to them and talk to people that work in that field, but you may not have the connections, and that's fine. Just talk to people, right? Especially the older students, right? If you're 18, 17, I want you to talk to 20-year-olds, 23-year-olds, because the older a person is, the more they've seen of the real world, right? The real world outside of high school, they've seen it. You haven't. And I want you to take what they say seriously. There were two older people in my life besides my parents that sort of warned me about switching my major and things like that, like my classmates, and they were older than me. But I was arrogant. I was arrogant, to be honest, and I was a little naive in my decision making and my belief in myself, and how, oh, it's fine, maybe it didn't work for you, but I can do it, you know? Like, I just had this huge amount of self-belief, and I had this thought of, oh, but I want to see. I want to see what life is like in this other major compared to my other major, and then I'll make my decision then. Because I had, thank God, alhamdulillah, I had the freeway, the leeway to see the two worlds and not lose anything, right? Because I wasn't paying for it, right? I was just trying to figure things out now, and I completely disregarded what people suggested to me. And not only that, but I was unclear of how the real world worked, and I was unclear with just how life worked, honestly, and I was unclear of who I am, severely unclear of who I am. And I was severely unaware of who I am in due part to the lack of a gap term I took, and just I talked about this in Reframe Thought, Reframe Control, I believe, in one of my earlier videos, that your identity after you graduate from high school completely fractures. At least it did for me, and I know it did for a couple of people I know, and they were just lost. And some of those people took a gap term, others didn't, and they switched. I didn't take a gap term, I switched. Now I'll switch back to my previous major. It's just a lot of confusion, right? And this is just a growing pain, right? It's like in the Regency era when you suddenly transition from like empirical waistlines to suddenly like you're having like balloon sleeves. It doesn't make sense, right? But they're trying to transition from that to the other decade. It's a very silly example, but it's a historical example. Yeah, so it's just a growing pain that it comes from just trying to go from this level to this new phase, It's like this adulting phase, I suppose is what they call it. Yeah, so really just know thyself. That is the most profound, important advice that I could give to you, and you will not know yourself unless you meet yourself. Where do you meet yourself? What is yourself? What does that self wear? What does that self think? What does that self eat? Where does that self hang out? Who does that self talk to? You don't know that because you don't know you yet. You haven't met that self yet. So another nice way to do this is to talk to more people, like I told you, except not just about university and career choice, just talk. There are a lot more pieces of advice of picking a university degree I would give you that I would sort of put a whole different video about it, but because this is kind of a general thing, is that before you go from this video, I want you to just keep this one piece of advice in your head. Do not be arrogant. Do not be arrogant. You are not that different from anyone else. Don't think, oh, that person couldn't do it, but I could do it, It's not. I'm still unclear if that is a bad or good way of thinking, but I've discovered throughout the days and months that it is not that one thing is good or bad, it is that a balance of both is necessary. On one hand, you ought to be confident and you ought to say, oh, yes, I could do it, you can do it, but I could do it. But it should be devoid of this undertone of you couldn't, but I could. There's a clear arrogance in this tone of voice, and I think you should be aware of your arrogance and your ego. You should be very aware of yourself. And you have to understand that you're more like people than you are not. So if somebody gives you a piece of advice, more than a few people give you the same piece of advice and warn you of it, don't think that it does not apply to you. Okay? or if you're doubting yourself, you need, again, to meet yourself. And when you meet yourself and you know exactly what kind of life you want for yourself, then you can begin to sort of question the advice that you receive. Elsewise, I do recommend that you take that advice seriously. You should take it seriously either way, regardless if you met yourself, regardless if you're sure of yourself. And you just see the advice and then take it in, right? Yeah. Please just don't pick your university degree in a silly way. Take your time in evaluating it. And remember that uni is very goofy. It's very goofy. Very stupid, very silly. And I could make a whole different video about why uni is stupid. Tell me if you want that. Bye. Note and also a very funny observation. I did accidentally end up postponing myself. Yeah, I was supposed to write. Well, I wasn't supposed to. It wasn't part of the plan of today, but that is myself. But instead I filmed a video, but I feel like this is kind of a helpful video. So yeah, I'll write after this, I hope.